All right, welcome everyone to the Ex Umbras podcast. Scholar McLarney here, and with me is
Schoolman Fawcett, and I am a lowly teacher under Headmaster McLarney at the Chesterton Academy of St. Isidore Learning Center, the world's first and to date only online Chesterton Academy. And if you're interested in what a class at our online Chesterton Academy might look like, this is a great way to find out. In fact, this is not just a class, but this is like having a guest lecturer today. We're breaking new ground here on the Ex Umbras podcast.
Indeed, yes. And with us is Dr. Nathan Pinkoski. He is the Assistant Professor of Humanities at the Hamilton Center at the University of Florida. And we are very happy to have him here on the show to discuss Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis. And we also have, I suppose, another reason for having him on the show is he's a graduate from our district. So,
That's right,
of alumni, illustrious alumni. And so we're happy to discuss a little of your take on Lewis and Abolition of Man. So I guess
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for joining us. So just to jump out of the gates, can you just briefly, what is Abolition of Man? Why is it significant? Why should we pay attention to some work from, well, not quite 100 years, but 80 years old now? Like this, it's 2020 something now. So forget 1943. Like what's going on? So what's
it's almost coming up to its. Well, we're actually, in fact, in the 80th anniversary of it, because at least in the so the way Abolition of Man was set up was it was a series of lectures, 3 lectures that Lewis gave right in the middle of the Second World War at the University of Durham, right in 1943. So the book we get is the version of that lectures prepared for publication. And I think, just to be provocative right from the very start, I think we should think of this as, and why it's important, because it's one of the great, and it should be read as such, one of the great dystopian texts of the 20th century. Now, what does it mean by that? Surely you might think, oh, this is mostly a philosophy text. How is it a dystopia? On the lines of, I don't know, 1984, George Orwell's 1984, or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Well, I put it to you that when we're trying to think about what a dystopia is, it's about identifying the most troubling trends indeed in our society, and imagining what the implications of those are, where they would take us. And that's what you get in this book. This is the philosophical version of it. And then if you want the literary version, right, the literary version would be Lewis's novel, That Hideous Strength. So both are connected. I think if you're philosophically minded and listening to this, then this is the book for you, because it outlines those troubling implications in the logical manner. Where does this logic of this particular way of thinking take us? But if you want the literary version, that's alongside it, then we have to go to That Hideous Strength. So that's what I put it to you, is the thing that makes this book important for us to read now. It's one of the great dystopian texts, and we need to understand what is Lewis focused on, what concerns does he have about where society is going, and why does he make this claim, which actually comes up in it, that if you follow the logic through, you end up with, quote, the destruction of the society which accepts it.
Now, this is peculiar because the subtitle does not say The Abolition of Man, Reflections on Society and the Troubling Trends in Politics. Yeah. The subtitle is Reflections on Education, with special reference to the teaching of English in the upper form of schools. Now, Dr. Pinkoski, what does that have to do with totalitarian dystopian society?
Yeah.
Right. So I think, first of all, this is Lewis being glib. Remember, he's an academic, and his most famous academic work at this stage is a work that's not really, people who read Lewis now don't really know it. Is The Discarded Image, a work about the transformation of images that we use to understand the world from the late medieval period into the early modern period. but I put it to you that it's actually contained in the title, even though the title's put up in a more technical way, because what Lewis is worried about is what is going to be the impact of this way of teaching that we see in what he calls the Green Book, put out in society at large. And why he's focused on this book, it's an obscure textbook. We think we know the name of it now, but Lewis hides the name of it, doesn't mention the name of the real authors for it. Why would you care about this little textbook that is made its way into a few university classes? And it's precisely because of the pernicious form of education that it provides. That's what Lewis is worried about. He's worried about, what Machiavelli might call the effectual truth of the argument. There's a real truth too about the problem of the argument, but he's worried about the pretensions that people have who are putting these kinds of arguments there and distributing them en masse, because they're trying to use it to change the way we think, the way future generations think, and the way future generations act.
Yes. So the way people think, the way future generations will act. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that comes to mind, I don't know if this will take us too far afield, but our students do briefly touch on St. Thomas More's Utopia. And by the time they get to grade 12, we go through Brave New World. So they're familiar with dystopia, but usually we presented dystopia meaning no place, like no land, right? So it's this theoretical
utopia.
Utopia. But I guess dystopia would be the question is this taking place, right? So is this dystopian in the sense of it's no land, or I guess a bad version of what no land would look like, or is this something that's taken root and now is flourishing in our midst? So okay, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can go with that, but
well, I think before we can answer that question, we have to talk about exactly what is he identifying as being the problem in modern education and the way he's teaching us to think. Right? It's funny, but as you comment, Dr. Pinkoski, I'm thinking about 1984 again. So that's the imaginative picture of a dystopia. But the appendix there, well, not even the appendix. There's the appendix on Newspeak. But really, the companion piece is Politics and the English Language, right? The essay that Orwell wrote about the way writing was going and how kind of vacuous it had become, and how a lot of nebulous language is being used in exchange for concrete, shorter sentences. And I think that's a very apt analogy between 1984 and That Hideous Strength, and between Politics and the English Language and The Abolition of Man, which is responding to a textbook. A textbook with the true title called The Control of Language. Right. And that's the real title of the Green Book, is The Control of Language. Now, that's an intriguing in its own right. That's a kind of technological approach to communication. How can you use language to, as you mentioned, Machiavellian, achieve a particular outcome? So I think that's a clue right there. So I think before getting into, do we see what it predicts taking root and flourishing today? Let's get into it a little bit. What exactly does Lewis see as as a shorthand, we'll say the problem with modern education, or the teaching of English in the upper form of schools?
Or what's wrong with control of language?
What's wrong with control of language? Sure.
Yeah. So, well, let's focus on the first part of what you asked, the problem, the specific problem, and I think we could put it very simply as a philosophy of pure subjectivism, is what Lewis is identifying, and the example he uses is this example that is a story told by the English Romantic poet Samuel Coleridge. Two tourists come to visit a majestic waterfall. Looking upon it, one calls it sublime, and the other says, yes, it's pretty. And Coleridge is disgusted by the response of the latter, because he thinks it's inadequate to the phenomenon at hand. But the way that the authors of the textbook, of the Green Book, the way they extrapolate what the true lesson of this is that when the man says this is sublime, in quotation marks, he looks like he's making a remark about the waterfall, appears to be making a remark about the waterfall, but actually he's not talking about the waterfall, but about his own feelings. So when we're talking and using the language of sublime, or speaking about something that is beautiful, we're actually not talking about the object, we're describing our own state, our own feelings. And this then applies to not just the beautiful, but the good and the true, that we're actually just talking about our own language as we use it. And the philosophical lesson that the authors want to impart is that we're basically misusing language when we ascribe objective value to the world. And language properly used would not do that. And one of the philosophical schools, which is in the background here, which we discuss more if we want to, but I think it's important to see that this is in the background, is positivism. This is the position associated with the logical positivism at the time. But I think we can see very quickly that this is an argument for relativism, because it's saying don't assign any value to the world, don't even assume that the world has any value contained within it. All we can do is, and when we're properly philosophically enlightened, all we're really doing is expressing our own feelings. You might think this about the waterfall, you might think this about murder. You run the examples however you like. You're not actually describing something that is real. All you're doing is setting up your own feelings. And I think to go to the other broader point, like what's the social effect of this, Lewis thinks that the philosophical argument here, it's not that difficult to attack. He attacks it on grounds of coherence, of consistency, but it's when you get everyone thinking in this manner, that's where the real pernicious consequences are. And that's what he thinks is what's he say there at the one line, that this is why the paragraph contains that this little extrapolation of Coleridge that they give. This is why it contains all the steps necessary for, title of the book, The Abolition of Man. This momentous little paragraph contains all the seeds necessary for the abolition of man, the destruction of humanity. Because what happens when it's put into practice?
Well, that begs for elaboration. Why would saying, I don't think that Rocky Mountains out in Western Canada, I don't really care so much for them. You might think they're beautiful, but I think they're an obstruction. I follow the policy of the Rhino Party back in the 90s that said we should plow the Rocky Mountains so that people in BC have a better view of the ocean.
Right.
I don't see any aesthetic value to them, right?
Or the people of Alberta.
Sure, yeah, of course, the prairie provinces would have a clearer view, because really they're just obstructions to sight.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
There's nothing exhilarating about a hike. It's really just an inconvenience or something. How does one get from that to dystopia, Dr. Pinkoski?
Well, that's partly the argument of the second and third sections,
right?
For how they play out. But just to, I think, cut to the chase and keep the question that you asked in mind about control of language and such. This being the problem. Well, one of the problems I think we note very quickly is that if you're saying that certain statements about the world are wrong-headed or such, you're asking people who have those kinds of judgments to recalibrate them, to say different things, right? And the task of educators is to control you and direct you away from using those expressions like "this is sublime" and towards the expressions of feeling and such. So there's right from the start, we're already should I think intuit the totalitarian nature about this. But also, I think very quickly we have to understand that we're dealing with background assumptions that require us to deny any objective value in the world. So it's not just going to be about the Rocky Mountains or about your view of a particular waterfall. It's going to be, which, as I said, your views about morality, your views about the basic moral judgments about murder, about theft, about rape, right? About these very, very fundamental activities that we evaluate to be intrinsically wrong are immediately going to be called into question. So it's no surprise that this generation of logical positivists are also out there trying to deny that there is any such thing as an intrinsically evil act, an intrinsically immoral act, and this becomes part of the project of doing. So we have to see that that in the background of these kinds of casual assumptions or casual discussions about this might be beautiful to you, this might be beautiful to all, and someone might say, well, what is beauty anyway? It's all just something that we make up. We have to see the connection between other kinds of evaluations that we make about the world. And Lewis's contention in all of this is that the background assumption is a denial of objective value. And when you deny that there's reality in the world, then you are turning over authority to someone else to make and compose reality how that authority wants it to be. Hence the control of language part. So the limiting, the ways that limit our, that place limits upon how I can order the world, because I have to receive the world. That's my first position as a human being, is I receive and respond to the reality that's already there. If that's not the case, then I can make the world however I want it to be. And I can force that upon others, impose that upon others who were caught up in the follies of thinking about the world in an objective manner, right? Those people, certainly there's a problem with the way they're thinking, a very serious problem. They need to be re-educated, right? First for the camps, you might say.
So you're speaking about the abolition of kind of the idea of an objective value in the world.
Yeah.
Why is the title then the abolition of man rather than the abolition of nature or something like that?
Well, great. So I think that takes us into the second section a bit. Although before I do that, I think there's some nice little points at the end that I think is key for us to bear in mind, particularly for anyone who's engaged with the task of education. Lewis thinks that there's a process of human reasoning that we need to pay attention to. That this account, we're basically just saying objective world versus, objective world versus feelings. Affirm feelings, reject this notion of objective world. There's a serious distortion in the way that this account understands human beings, understands the process of human reasoning. And Lewis makes a division. Actually, we were talking just briefly before this about the Platonism of Lewis, how extent it goes. Well, he actually affirms a Platonic division here. He calls it head, chest, belly, but this corresponds to the tripartite division of the soul that you see in the Republic. Head being the rational part, chest being thumos, the spirit, and then belly being the kinds of appetitive desires that we might have for say eating. And where we get our identity as human beings, what makes us humans, isn't what we might immediately think, oh, it's the head, that's what makes us humans. Not for Lewis. Lewis says that it's actually the chest. Why? Why is it this thumotic element is what matters? Because the chest is where we develop our character. The chest is where we train our passions, where we organize the right relationship between head and the belly. So the head governs the belly, our reason governs our desires through our chest, through our character. And what the authors of the book are doing, Lewis thinks, is creating men without chests. They are imagining a particular kind of human being that is understood by a false dichotomy, wherein the notion of how you develop your character to respond to the world is being expunged and removed from what it is to be a human being. So that's, I think, the first sense in the book in which the abolition of man comes up. We are talking about authors who are training men without chests, men that aren't really men, human beings that aren't really human beings, that are not being understood in terms of what Lewis is saying is the defining factor of human beings. And so I think what's key here for anyone interested in education and the purpose of education is that we understand the goal of education is not simply to transmit a set of facts, not simply to transmit knowledge in that sense, but it's rather to ensure that we train our desires and affections to respond to the world in the right way. And indeed, that's what Lewis thinks most education set out to do for most of human history. But this new model is turning away from that. So that's I think the first sense we have to understand the abolition of man. I think there's another big sense, I alluded to it already, I'll put it on the table for us so we keep it in picture, the abolition of human society, the destruction of human society. The abolition of man in that sense is what comes up in the third section in particular. But I think it's really important for us to grasp that first point, particularly for those of you like myself, like yourselves, who are involved in the world of education and trying to, and therefore in the business of training children to learn truths about the world and truths about what they are as human beings and what they're supposed to do. I'll pause there for a second.
Sure. No, that's very helpful. And I think, there's lots that you've mentioned there that I think we just like to make some connections there. I know for our students, be familiar with Plato's tripartite soul, and we read through the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's always
works which are about character, I think.
Yeah. Well,
understand if you come into teaching it with the sense that, I'm going to teach you about a factual event that may have happened several thousand years ago. Here are portrayals of the Greeks, these kinds of very dry historical accounts. You expunge what's exciting about the text.
Yeah. But what you're saying now about Lewis almost seems like Homer's Revenge modified, because when we get to Plato's Republic, he's censoring Homer, right? And for the thematic reasons, like he's creating this warrior society, and we need the noetic bit that's going. And I mean, we look at, obviously, great love for Plato, but also the dystopian elements of his Republic when it comes to education and the myths and so on that he's propounding. So here it seems like Lewis is almost you're saying the purpose is to train our desires and affections to respond to the world in an appropriate way, as it objectively is. So this is almost a correction, perhaps, or a response then to Plato's censoring of Homer in some ways. Right.
And what it reminds me of is something that we discussed in our episode on artificial intelligence with Pascal. Right, how Pascal speaks of these sort of three layers, I suppose, of reality, right? Where there's matter, that's where someone like Alexander the Great rules in this area. That would be sort of similar to the belly. And then you have mind above that, and that's where you have the great Greek philosophers. And then for Pascal, the highest level is the heart, right? Love is greater than intellect, which Jacques Maritain said was the great insight of Christianity. So we have this important, if all you have is the Homeric, that's problematic.
Right.
So Plato kind of stresses the importance of the intellect, but that on its own is problematic too. And then Christianity brings something that's sort of higher and is kind of the revenge of Homer in the sense that that's now redeemed. Right now, heart is actually the unifying factor. That matter. And maybe there's some of Lewis's. I mean, Lewis is obviously Platonic, but he's primarily Christian in a way that a thinker like maybe George Grant isn't.
Right.
Because something that I hear sometimes people say, and I know what they mean, is that nowadays people don't know how to do critical thinking. Right. And in a sense, they're right. Yeah. But I don't think that's the problem. I think students are taught to do nothing but critical thinking in some ways, right? They're taught to do nothing but deconstruction. They're taught to do nothing but let's try to find the flaws. Let's try to see what is the historical contextual reason behind what are all the sexist, economic, oppressive elements behind the novel that we're reading or something like that.
Right.
Now that may have its place, but what's missing actually is the chest, right? What you have is like the head and the belly, but that kind of the affection that ought to be inspired by a reading in the classics or looking at great art or listening to great music, that is so diminished by this kind of overcritical thing that we have. And in fact, a dystopian government is in some ways nothing but a brain. It's nothing. Right. It's like the Moloch, right, in Allen Ginsberg's Howl or something like that, right? It's nothing but it's the machine, right? It's the the AI in some ways. So I think it's important that Lewis is. It strikes me that Lewis is being Platonic, but he's primarily being Christian, right? He's reading that tripartite decision through the lens that love is actually the definitive quality of a human being, not just that they're rational animals, but that we're ultimately in the image of God.
Yeah, I almost find myself agreeing with you here.
Oh,
We
dear.
sometimes go back and forth on Augustine or Aquinas, or like Plato or Aristotle. Then you got well, the Aquinas and then Scotus, right? Who's going to emphasize the will or the heart above the intellect.
Sure.
But no, I think
Probably
that
Franciscan or Dominican.
that's right. Yeah.
Down to.
So
Now, this is interesting because something that we were also discussing. So as you're listening to this, it may seem like, oh, well, this is clearly one of C.S. Lewis's devotional works. It goes along with mere Christianity. Now, Lewis maintains that's not what he's doing. He says this is not supposed to be theistic or a defense of Christianity.
Well, he says an indirect argument.
Indirect.
No, it's not.
Yes.
Not an indirect argument for theism when he gets into the doubt. So,
Sure. So let's talk about what he says
do you want to
get into whether
yeah.
this is subtly
So
Christian.
because we were just alluding there to book 2, so I don't know if you want to just give us a quick.
He speaks of the Tao. So let's can you expound for us what he means by that and what the relevance is
and what's going on?
Yeah. So I think one of the questions, just to connect from what you were just talking about loves, is that love is about this is a bit Augustinian and riff of me, but I think it's a useful one, right? Love isn't just about one single monolithic thing. It's rather about kinds of loves, and the real challenge that we have as human beings is how to order them, how to rank them, how to put them in their proper place. And the argument that you effectively get from the first section is that the chest, which is, I think you're quite right to talk about, this is related to love, gives us the experience of the objective world, moral truths, aesthetic truths. So what is that experience actually of? What is this world out there, and what's describing? Well, that's where the second section comes in. That's what is the Tao. Just to keep the point to the text here, Lewis thinks when he's talking about the Tao that he's talking about a kind of moral system that is in effect our collective moral heritage, the body of human ethical knowledge that transcends time and place. So it's contained in all the great religions: Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, West and East, and all these different moral systems share recognizable universal features and propositions. Now, of course, they disagree about things. Lewis isn't saying, well, they all just come down to the same thing. It all just is. It's all just the same. He's certainly not doing that. There are disagreements that emerge, and very serious ones. But the way we resolve those disagreements, or we could even say, to use a kind of Mercanterian language, the way we get a better understanding of our disagreements is by reference to the Tao. So it's an internal reference that is required for us to better understand the disagreements and better understand the similarities. And conversely, then, Lewis's claim is that all values that we have come from the Tao. If you reject the Tao, then you have no basis outside of it for anything that looks like a value system. And most people, Lewis calls them innovators, most people who say that they're making up something new are in fact riffing off the Tao, right? Riffing on the Tao. Their philosophy is in fact parasitic on it. The really dangerous people, pointing ahead to the next section, right, are those who are claiming to invent something new. But this is in effect the claim that Lewis is making about what the Tao is. It's our shared moral heritage.